Welcome to the wonderful world of Ghost Horse Hollow. I'm your host, Severn Williamson, and this is My Family Book Nook. My Family Book Nook podcast is brought to you by the Owsley County Public Library in Booneville, Kentucky, and by Jackson Energy, a Touchstone energy cooperative, and by Ghost Horse Gifts, featuring the fine intaglio jewelry and gemstone sculpture of artisan Jack Williamson, on the web at www.etsy.com/shop/ghosthorse-gifts. My Family Book Nook features the saga of the MacKennon homesteaders 100 years in the future in the Appalachian wilderness. Listeners may wish to follow along in the fairy lore of Ghost Horse Hollow, available on Amazon Books and Kindle Readers, starting with Book 1, Turn of the Blade. My Family Book Nook also shares stories, myths, and legends from around the globe in support of world literacy, conservation, and cultural exchange. And now for our ongoing adventure from the fairy lore of Ghost Horse Hollow. We left off in Ghost Horse Hollow with the four riders heading out to meet with the Autumn Fairy Prince. Chapter 6, Games of Chance. From his elevated post on the weather vane, Black Bottom carefully watched the four riders cross the withered cornfield and disappear into the forest. The nearly round moon had just passed beyond the second hill of Denderon. Stars glittered overhead in a clear black sky. Eli MacKennon had securely positioned himself in the loft of the hay barn, and the teenagers' homemade weapons lay within easy reach. The rooster signaled to the young man that all was well, before fluffing his feathers and dipping his beak into a china teacup full of delicious hot pea soup. Black Bottom firmly believed that all chickens deserved the good life. A cozy striped blanket lay before him on the roof to warm his cracked toes. The fighting fowl was determined to enjoy this wild night, while performing his duty, of course. All that could be seen was Glow-Gold's fairy lantern winking faintly through the bare branches of the hardwood trees. Panther proudly attended her father. His legendary smoky cream stallion, Elevar's ivory steed, led the way up Dog Trot Trail. Next in line was Celestial's opal moon, who carefully bore her young mistress over the uneven ground. The gentle mare's icy breath rolled through the evergreens. Panther could detect a snuffling noise coming from up ahead. Aaron's hounds, Bugle and Bell, were making the horses nervous. The dogs charged beyond the beams of Glow-Gold's lantern, their sensitive noses pressed to the moldy hickory leaves of the forest floor. Panther turned to see that Accolon's bay moon, Aaron's handsome stallion with 4 white socks, was following closely behind her. Jonas Whitehand brought up the rear on Titrimia's star shield. The elegant Cremello mare was bathed in violet shadows, but Panther could discern Whitehand's distinctive palm prints on his mount. Both of Jake's friends had tied their double-bladed axes to their saddles. Aaron was listening intently to every bark and brawl the hounds were making up ahead. Whitehand was listening to the woodlands. He knew that the sudden movement of a startled deer might serve as a critical warning. Across Jake MacKennon's broad back was a mighty sword. The weapon had recently been forged by the Lion Guards, who resided in the far northeastern corner of the fairylands. The Lion Guards were exceptional firecrafters, well versed in the timeless enchantments of the hammer and anvil. The craftsmen had folded and pounded hard steel and courage together to create a thin, curved weapon with a characteristic wavy pattern on its blade. The sword had been a grand gift from King Accolon to acknowledge the farmer's contributions in protecting the royal territories. Panther's father also packed his treasured hunting knife securely tucked into a soft leather sheath on his left hip, for all of the MacKennon brothers were born left-handed. Dog Trot Trail wound upward, plunging through rocky gullies and ever-steepening slopes. Panther could hear 2 screech owls calling to one another on either side of the narrow path. Their unusual cries came in sudden bursts as the birds followed the travelers westward. The riders remained quiet, subdued by the unnerving calls. Panther shivered beneath the protective folds of the Cloak of Wheels. She was grateful that her father had remembered her warm riding gloves. With several deep balls, bugle and bell signaled approaching danger. An enormous black bear was speeding down the hill toward the riders. The beast's thick hide bristled with rage as he crashed through the wet brambles and rough saplings. Jake MacKennon held up his hand to bring the party to a brisk halt. The bear climbed atop a log and cuffed both hounds aside with one great crippled paw. "Three-toe!" Jake called as glow gold illuminated the furious creature. "Out of my way!" huffed the bear. Three-toe lumbered down from the thick log, sliding on all fours to within a few feet of the lead stallion's dancing hooves. The woodland dweller was covered with burrs and broken twigs, as if he had been lumbering heedlessly along for some time. "What troubles you tonight, old friend?" MacKennon asked, as he reined in his pawing mount. Jake knew the black bear well. The farmer's furry acquaintance had frequently dined at Lady Hannah's generous table in Ghost Horse Hollow. Jake, however, had never seen Three-Toe in such a state of agitation. Elevar's ivory steed sidled forward, avoiding the strong-smelling bear. "I have lost my best book of fairy tales. That is what is vexing me," Three-Toe roared. "Tormac cheats at the gaming tables. How could I have been so slow in the head? I knew the last count was an uneven number. May his wings fall off and rot." The bear sat down with a ragged breath and put his muzzle between his paws. "Not your special volume, the one with the watercolors that come to life whenever the moon is full?" Panther said, interrupting her father's inquiry. She had pored over the black bear's favorite illustrations many a time during her apprenticeship, which had included hours and hours of study in Three-Toe's library cave. Bears had forever been in charge of the forest library, located near Buckthorn Pass on the side of Grandfather Mountain. Historical records were kept inside stones, as well as in books and on rolled parchments. Bears understood caves, rocks, and the importance of research. They spent many quiet hours reading during the winter months, pretending to hibernate. Three-Toe had inherited the honorable position of royal bookkeeper from his grandfather bear, Rory Honeybutter. The particular book in question had been illustrated by a famous fairy artist, Sir Emmet Hawthornberry, during the Middle Ages. In keeping with the wishes of the author, Lord Gideon Acorn, Sir Emmet had used a lot of gold ink and ground gemstone dust as he made his illustrations. One unfortunate evening, the fairy had been sipping a hot enchanted tea as he admired a newly completed picture. Sir Emmet's pet bat unexpectedly flapped across the book and upturned the steaming liquid all over the drawings. The tea contained thrushwold leaves, known for bringing inanimate objects to life. The distraught painter watched helplessly as the tea seeped into the manuscript. When the clumsy bat exited out the narrow window of the monastery, Sir Emmet noticed that the accident had occurred on a full moon. Since that time, the thrushwold pictures awoke and danced, or argued, or played thrilling music, depending upon the illustration. Whenever the moon waxed full, Panther knew that the moving figures' costumes rendered the book invaluable, for the text concerned the history of the Starlight Fairy Crown jewels. A powerful and greedy fairy, such as Tormac, could possibly steal the jewels right off the dancing illustrations. Any decent fairy would consider such a theft a scandalous act. "Yes, my favorite one, Lord Gideon Acorn's The Wealth of Fairy Queens," muttered Three-Toe. The normally pleasant and cheerful bear looked so dejected that both farmer and daughter dismounted and sat on either side of him. Jake enjoyed a long history with Three-Toe, for he had rescued the struggling cub when an iron trap had threatened to claim the bear's right front paw. The wound had resulted in a very distinctive footprint and a slight drag in Three-Toe's rolling walk. Tonight, the bear gave each human a sad lick on the nose before blowing his own into Jake's handy pocket rag. "I thought you gave up gambling, Three-Toe," Jake began slowly. "What were you doing at Tormac's table? You know he can calculate every throw of the dice in his head before the cubes stop rolling." Three-Toe moaned and sniffed. "I'll tell you what," Jake went on with determination. "We're on our way to pay a visit to the Autumn Fairy Prince. I'll do what I can to win your book back, if'n it means that much to you." The bear looked up with a pathetic roll of his weepy brown eyes. "I sure could use your help, Three-Toe, should things get out of hand. Why don't you just fall in behind Titremia's star shield and stay out of sight?" MacKennon smiled. With a vigorous bound of hope, Jake's old friend assumed his place in the line of farm warriors. The moon passed over the third hill of Denderon as Panther and her father remounted. Soon the dogs announced that the dead oak tree was just behind the next ridge. As Bugle and Bell's warning balls faded into the darkness, the riders were engulfed in a wave of pounding rhythm. The beating of many drums cascaded down Dog Trot Trail, calling the riders into a vortex of danger. As the horses cleared the top of the gravel ridge, Panther could see a large bowl of brown grass and scattered boulders. An ancient oak, devoid of life, dominated the center of the bowl. Its spiky twigs and twisted limbs enshrouded the Coyote King's throne like a hood of barbed wire. Panther had never heard such a ruckus in the forest. Normally, the fairy gatherings were full of playful laughter and enchanting music, but Tormac's gaming circle howled and banged and hooted. Hostile rhythms were coming from goat-hide drums, hit repeatedly with knobbed leg bones. The unceasing drums were hand-painted with wreaths of bare branches, rotten fruits, and other signs of autumn's decay. "These are no ordinary coyotes." Jonas Whitehand's voice reached the girl's ears over the threatening noise. "They should be smaller, much lighter, and less aggressive. What has happened here? The spirit of the land is cold." "Feral dogs have crossed with the original coyote pack," Jake responded. He twisted in his saddle, preparing his posse for the evening's disturbing sights. The Coyote King is actually part wild dog, as are his three guardians, the Rough-Throat brothers. Broken Fang, Red Growl, and Hammerheart are an odd trio. They have magic enough to speak the fairy tongue, but they're too stubborn to leave off their customary howling and snarling. These four beasts control the others. If King Vixus shows any sign of weakness, the Rough-Throat brothers will fight to the death to determine the next leader. "That does not explain the cold nature of this place," the native warrior said, searching for deeper answers. "The wild dogs escaped the laboratories long ago. What happened to them, I can't say," Jake said over the increasing tempo of the drums. "They were the result of breeding experiments. The street armies needed aggressive dogs for sniffing out their enemies." Aaron Ray's usually soothing voice was strained. "I used to pick up a few meals in exchange for cleaning the dog cages. After the time of great change, gangs took over most of the flooded city on the far side of the muddy Jagon River. Supplies were scarce, and my folks had very little food to spare." "That explains the scars on your arm," Panther said, intuitively putting a few observations together. "I thought the striped marks on your wrist were from an accident in the forge." "No," Aaron replied as Accolon's bay moon brought the metal worker to the edge of the harsh slopes. "I nearly lost my hand that day. It was wrong what the soldiers did to those good dogs." Jake and Whitehand nodded. They shared in Aaron's disgust. The genetic research had resulted in dangerous, unnatural adversaries, which the homesteaders had to keep in check. Naturally, all four horses were reluctant to descend into the bowl. They snorted and pawed at the rocky ground as the last of the pines gave way to barren soil. Jake wondered what had possessed the previous caretakers of this property to poison the roots of the forest. What crops could possibly grow in tainted earth? The farmer had wept the day the stately oak tree had begun to shrivel and turn black. He had watched Eleonora, the oak's guardian eagle, fly silently over Ghost Horse Hollow, seeking a new home in the remote southern regions. MacKennon had felt justified in running the landowners off before they blighted the entire region with their seeping chemicals, though the once shady bowl had never recovered. Several mushroom and lichen fairies had attempted to reclaim the land, only to succumb to the herbicides. All that remained were mangled, wingless creatures lurking in the bowels of the rotten oak. These distortions of nature banged the drums for their master, the Coyote King, whose pack of ruthless fang runners had claimed the dead oak tree for their secret meeting place. The Autumn Fairy Prince had added his seasonal gambling tables to complete the scene. Jake urged his steed forward, grimly leading the way down into the sunken land, where a circle of restless coyotes awaited them all. This part of my Family Book Nook podcast is dedicated to world conservation. Everyone can make a difference by restoring the world's forests, conserving energy, recycling, developing and sharing green technologies, farming organically, preserving wilderness, and protecting our pollinators. To live in harmony with the earth is to respect the sacred hoop of life. And now our adventure continues. A deep fire pit smoldered at the foot of the Coyote King's throne, which consisted of a smooth, flat slab of limestone atop a rough pine tree stump. As she approached the outer circle, Panther thought that Lord Vixus looked subdued, even worried. His narrow snout and curved fangs hung low over his paws, and he was drooling. The Rough-Throat brothers wandered furtively from one part of the circle to another. They watched each other suspiciously over the dying coals. Their mother coyote had crossed with a heavy-boned, dangerous pit cur. Tormac had made the 3 resulting offspring his special minions by sprinkling them with a magic powder that encouraged ruthless obedience. The act was forbidden by the judge lore, of course, but Tormac had deliberately disobeyed the gatekeeper's restrictions. The Autumn Fairy Prince chose to uphold his own interests. As Panther studied the brothers, she was certain that the Coyote King was in some sort of trouble. The smaller, less dominant howlers had eaten all but the jawbones of a charred carcass. They slobbered and whined as the horses approached. It seemed that fresh meat was in short supply. Panther reached forward to stroke Celestial's neck. "Easy, girl," the 16-year-old whispered. "I won't let those scruff-tails touch you." Panther could hear the other riders calming their mounts as well. Three-Toe, in keeping with MacKennon's orders, stayed out of sight at the edge of the bowl. The bear positioned himself between 2 boulders, keeping a watchful eye on the circle's proceedings. Only Three-Toe's massive size and strength had enabled him to escape from the gambling tables unharmed after he had failed to win. He snarled, remembering the loss of his precious book. Next to the formidable bear crouched Bugle and Bell, their every muscle twitching with the instinctive drive to attack the ring of howling coyotes. Aaron Ray had given his hounds a strict command to remain with Three-Toe. They would do more harm than good if they tussled with the Coyote King's fang runners too soon. Jake backed Aaron's decision. The hounds were vulnerable and outnumbered. It was best for Bugle and Bell to remain far away from the fire circle. Glowgold, too, had disappeared from view. The household light fairy's bright wings were safely tucked inside Jake MacKennon's saddlebag. The little sprite recalled Hannah's warning about Tormac's gloomy castle. Long ago, the household light fairies had beaten the Autumn Fairy Prince quite soundly at his own gaming tables. Glowgold's brothers and sisters were excellent at speedy calculations and all forms of music and mathematics. The vengeful prince had never forgotten the insult. It was doubtful that Tormac would have met with the humans tonight had he known they associated with a light fairy. Glowgold peeked anxiously out from a narrow opening in the bag's deerskin lacings. He had waited many a year to catch a glimpse of the infamous Tormac. Panther's breath caught in her throat when at last she beheld the flaming majesty of the autumn fairy prince, his pumpkin orange cape furled behind his crooked narrow shoulders. Tormac's lizard skin suit bedazzled the eye. It was sewn with minute faceted garnets that captured the flickering light of the fire pit. Tall black boots, expertly fitted to his well-developed calves, adorned his lower half. Titrimia had informed Panther that the prince moved with an uncommon speed and agility. An ornate crown of dark jewels and gold filigree fitted over Tormac's lengthy mass of wavy black hair. 12 silver rings, one for each of the zodiac signs, adorned his 12 skinny fingers, which were brightly tipped with crimson polish. Lord Accolon's third son was quite proud of his 2 extra fingers and displayed them with obscene delight. A thin, sharp rapier dangled at his right hip, for the autumn prince was left-handed as well. The weapon was casually shoved into a wide belt, polished powder blue agates. Panther wondered why Tormac's leaf wings were folded protectively beneath his orange silk cape. Normally, a fairy's wings were presented with great pride. Then she remembered that the time of power for the autumn fairy prince was drawing to a close. The winter solstice was less than a moon cycle away. Perhaps his wings were beginning to decompose. Tormac would be too vain to expose his rotting self. Nearly 7 feet tall, the prince towered above the Coyote King, whose plain copper and leather circlet contrasted sharply with Tormac's fancy attire. A snap from the autumn fairy's painted fingertips abruptly ceased the deafening drums. Every heartbeat in attendance was left in suspense, still beating to the former hypnotic rhythm. In the tense silence that followed, Panther could hear the creak of her father's leather riding gloves as Jake opened and closed his fists. Well, 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 the great ploughman has left his fertile fields to join our little festivities. Tormac sneered when Elevar's ivory steed broke through the ring of shifty coyotes. Who knows? Perhaps he has come to place a bet on my silver wheel, the prince continued. Maybe the ploughman has heard of the odds in my profitable game of roll and count. The coyote pack crackled with laughter. Apparently, the prince's joke was both private and savage. Panther hugged Jake's left side, 1 pace behind her father's stallion. Aaron Ray and Jonas Whitehand stealthily untied their axes. Without a word, the 2 men maneuvered their mounts on either side of the farmer and his daughter. Jake allowed the howling to die down completely before replying. He used the edge in his voice to tip the balance of fear in his favor. I'm not a gambling man, but I always win if in its heads we're rolling. MacKennon leaned forward in his saddle. He would not allow his adversary to get the upper hand. The prince chose another tactic. Come, where are my manners? You and your party have ridden a long way through such spooky woods. Won't you join me for refreshments? Rotten apple wine, fungus pastries, stinking soup, or perhaps some nutshell tea. Tormac gestured invitingly toward his private dining table, which was set apart from the other gambling surfaces. Panther MacKennon was again puzzled as to why the autumn fairy prince was eating so many moonlight fairy dishes. Was he ill, or had he simply gone mad? Stinking soup had a horrible effect on starlight fairies. It made their hair fall out. Quickly the girl counted 6 alabaster slabs on iron tripods that held an equal number of sporting games. As Panther was calculating the number of tables, Alestiel's opal moon stepped forward nervously, bringing her young rider into plain view. "Get back," MacKennon whispered feverishly, but it was too late. The Autumn Fairy Prince whistled low, then frilled his tongue. "What have we here? A human child wearing one of the most valuable magical cloaks of all time? Oh, Plowman, you are full of surprises." Tormac turned his head to speak sharply to the Coyote King. He deliberately switched to using ancient fairy scroll, assuming that the farmer could not possibly understand the old language. Panther swiftly translated the conversation for her father. Ancient fairy scroll involved an elaborate use of hand gestures. The Coyote King, unable to duplicate the language with his rough paws, only grunted in response. "Tormac said that my cloak was worth a fortune in fairy silver pennies, enough to clear the Coyote King's extensive debts. The prince even thanked Lord Vixis for arranging this meeting tonight. It would seem that the Coyote King owes his own weight in magic silver, or his life, if he does not pay Tormac in full," Panther hurriedly explained. "The great debt must be settled by sunrise." Jake nodded. So that was why the Coyote King had called the humans to the dead oak tree. Vixis had something in mind to clear his gambling losses. Had he dared to offer Tormac the goats or chickens from the hollow? These items would hardly be worth the king's weight in fairy silver pennies. MacKennon swore under his breath. Surely Lord Vixis had more sense than to offer the prince a precious goat horse in exchange for the silver coins. Jake knew that the currency of both the Moonlight and the Starlight realms was extremely rare. The pennies were stamped with the profile of Lord Accolon on one side and an equally distinctive portrait of Lord Thracerak on the other. The metal was mined by dwarf mages who lived high in the Lion Paw mountain range. The dwarves kept to themselves and limited their production of the precious coins. Each coin, furthermore, was soaked in the deep, swirling waters of an underground river system. Crates of newly minted pennies were lowered beneath the surface of the cavernous lakes and streams on thick brass chains. The mountain waters gave the fairy coins a mysterious power. If spent or traded, the pennies would eventually find their way back home. Once rich, always rich, was a classic remark in the fairylands whenever Lion Paw currency was mentioned or exchanged. Jake assessed the situation again. The Cloak of Wheels obviously interested the Autumn Fairy Prince. Panther had thought it wise to inform her father that the magic of the starry fabric would vanish into the night sky if she removed the garment of her own free will. Father and daughter had spoken briefly of these things as they had mounted up at the hitching post. MacKennon doubted that Tormac knew anything about the special knot that Lady Hannah had tied under Panther's chin. Of course, Hannah had mentioned that there was one other way to break the cloak's protective spell. With another rapid glance around the fire circle, Jake felt his belly heave with fear for his daughter's safety. On Tormac's dining table, stuck upright in a wedge of smelly cheese, was a black troll blade. It was the very tool for cutting the green satin ribbons at Panther's throat. The farmer was pretty sure the Autumn Fairy Prince knew all about that device. Tormac grinned, his gold pupils and purple irises blazing with anticipation. The crafty prince waved his silver rings in the air. "We haven't dined," he said most humbly. No one breathed. The circle of fang runners tightened around the horses. Jake MacKennon carefully considered his next move. "Oh, human daughter," Tormac continued while addressing Panther directly, "the third son born to the High King of the Starlight Realm bids thee taste and toast most merrily at his table." It was an offer that could not be refused without breaking the rules of formal fairy etiquette. If the girl declined the prince's hospitable offer, he had every right to fly into a rage. When fairies were insulted or spurned, there was no end to their sulking. The farmer stood tall in his stirrups, distracting Tormac for but an instant. It was just the right amount of motion to break the dangerous eye contact between the cunning royal fairy and Miss Genevieve. Jake had not forgotten his promise to his wife to protect their eldest child from just such a treacherous ploy. "My entire party has already supped at my lady's fine table, as you well know," most overdressed autumn prince. Once done, free to decline, Jake said, quoting directly from the Book of Magic Manners. You call that a fine table? Tormac countered with venom. My Lady Hannah! What is she? Hardly a magical feast. Part human, part fairy, part waterfall mermaid. Rubbish! Jake colored noticeably. He had endured one insult too many. Hannah was not to be slandered. With a swift nudge to his stallion's belly, the farmer moved forward and forcefully grabbed Tormac's fancy brooch. He pulled the prince a foot off the ground, crushing his opponent against Elevar's mountain saddle. MacKennon leaned a bit closer to his enemy. I suggest that you keep a civil tongue in your head, or I'll show the Coyote King and all his brethren what comes from eating too much stinking soup. Tormac glared at the farmer. Even an uncouth seed sower like you would not dare to humiliate a royal. What? Reveal to all the world that the proud prince is as bald as a chicken egg? Your wig has never fooled me or my wife. Jake slowly lowered the enraged fairy, whose embarrassment now outweighed his stinging temper. I have a suggestion, Tormac said with a sleazy smile as he retreated. Let us skip the meal altogether and go right to the gaming tables. Surely there is something of mine you wish to play for, Plowman. There is one thing and only one thing I'll roll for. Lord Gideon Acorns, The Wealth of Fairy Queens, illustrated by Sir Emmett Hawthorne Berry. What? That musty, dusty book. It belonged to a lowly bear. I was just sitting on it. Well, whatever pleases thee, O earth tiller, the prince yawned. MacKennon electrified the circle with his unexpected acceptance of Tormac's offer. Lord Vixis wagged his tail. Perhaps the Coyote King would obtain the Cloak of Wheels and remain alive for yet another night. The drums exploded as the four humans dismounted. It was time for a friendly game of roll and count. Thank you for listening to my Family Book Nook podcast. Subscribe to our blog at myfamilybooknook.blogspot.com and follow us on Facebook, Pinterest, and YouTube at Ghost Horse Hollow and Ghost Horse Gift Gallery. To advertise with my Family Book Nook, contact Podbean's Pod Ads program for more information. Join us each Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, USA, for another episode in the exciting saga of the MacKennon homesteaders, as well as stories from around the globe. Podbean.com podcasts are available through a convenient app on your PC, tablet, or cell phone. Listen anytime. We appreciate your sharing my Family Book Nook episodes with your friends and family on social media. Watch it grow. Special thanks to the lovely Price Sisters on the web at thepricesisters.com for our closing music. Follow me on Instagram _ghost_horse. This is Anne Severn Williamson, and it's been a pleasure